I never thought a shovel would become my greatest enemy until the morning Patricia Donaldson knocked on my door with a clipboard and a scowl that could freeze hell itself. It was January in Rochester, Minnesota, and we were in the middle of the worst winter storm the region had seen in decades. I had just finished clearing my driveway and sidewalk for the third time that week when I heard the sharp rap on my front door. Opening it, I found Patricia, the president of our homeowner association, standing there in a pristine white parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Nathan Jenkins," she said without preamble, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "We need to discuss your snow removal activities." I blinked at her, confused. "My what?" "Your excessive and frankly disturbing snow removal habits," she continued, consulting her clipboard. "You have been observed clearing snow from your property no less than 17 times in the past 4 days. This violates Section 12.4 of our HOA bylaws regarding excessive outdoor activity during inclement weather." I stood there in my doorway, still holding my coffee mug, trying to process what I was hearing. "Patricia, I'm just keeping my driveway and walkway clear. That's what we're supposed to do." "There's a difference between reasonable maintenance and obsessive behavior, Nathan," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your constant shoveling creates noise pollution and sets an unrealistic standard for other residents. Not everyone has the time or energy to match your excessive standards." "It's been snowing constantly," I protested. "If I don't clear it regularly, it builds up and becomes dangerous." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're receiving a formal warning. If you continue this behavior, you'll be fined $250 per violation. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my snow-covered walkway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice near the street. I watched her steady herself and continue on, shaking my head in disbelief. In the 3 years I had lived in Meadowbrook Heights, I had dealt with plenty of Patricia's nonsense, but this was absurd even by her standards. I closed the door and called my neighbor, Roger, who lived 2 houses down. Roger was a retired engineer who had been in the neighborhood for over a decade and had countless stories about Patricia's tyrannical reign over the HOA. "She did what?" Roger's laugh boomed through the phone. "That woman has completely lost her mind. There's no such section in our bylaws. I helped write them 10 years ago. So she's just making this up, probably. But that doesn't mean she won't fine you anyway. She's done it before with other made-up violations. Last year, she fined the Hendersons for having curtains that were too cheerful. Said they violated the aesthetic harmony clause." I groaned. "So what do I do?" "Honestly, I'd say call her bluff. Keep doing what you're doing, but knowing Patricia, she'll escalate this into something ridiculous. Just be prepared." Roger's words proved prophetic. 2 days later, another storm dumped 8 inches of fresh snow overnight. I woke up at 6 in the morning and headed outside to clear my driveway before work. I was halfway done when I heard the familiar sound of Patricia's voice. "Nathan Jenkins, this is your second warning." I turned to see her standing at the end of my driveway, this time accompanied by 2 other HOA board members, Susan Miller and Karen Whitmore. Karen was Patricia's right-hand woman, a middle-aged blonde who seemed to live for finding violations. Susan, at least, usually tried to be reasonable, though she rarely stood up to Patricia. "Ladies," I said, leaning on my shovel, "good morning." "It's not a good morning when residents flagrantly disregard direct orders from the HOA board," Karen chimed in, her voice shrill in the morning air. "You were explicitly told to cease these excessive snow removal activities." "I have to get to work," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I need to clear my driveway to do that." "You could leave earlier and allow the snow to melt naturally," Patricia suggested. Or you could do what normal people do and clear at once, reasonably, instead of this obsessive behavior. I looked at the 3 women standing in front of my house, noting that they were all standing in the path I had just cleared. "You're standing on my cleared walkway right now," I pointed out. "If I hadn't shoveled, you'd be knee-deep in snow." Karen's face flushed. "That's beside the point. You're creating a hostile environment with your excessive standards. As of this moment, you're being fined $250, Patricia announced, making a note on her clipboard. "Any further violations will result in additional fines and potential legal action." "This is insane," I said, my frustration finally bubbling over. "You can't fine me for keeping my property safe and accessible." "We absolutely can," Patricia said coldly. "You agreed to abide by HOA regulations when you purchased your home. You'll receive formal documentation within 48 hours. They left, and I stood there in my driveway, shovel in hand, watching them trudge through the unshoveled snow back to Patricia's house at the corner of our cul-de-sac. That's when I noticed something interesting. Patricia's house was a corner lot, and her property included the drainage system for our entire street. The gutters along her roofline were already sagging under the weight of accumulated ice and snow. I finished clearing my driveway and went inside to get ready for work. As an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, I dealt with regulations and rules all day, but nothing prepared me for the Byzantine logic of an HOA run by someone like Patricia Donaldson. That evening, I received an email from the HOA with the formal fine notice attached. It cited Section 12.4, which, when I actually pulled up our bylaws online, had nothing to do with snow removal. The section actually dealt with exterior paint colors. I forwarded it to Roger. His response came back within minutes. "She's fabricating violations. This is actionable, but fighting it will cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. That's how she gets away with it." I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the snow-covered street. More snow was forecast for the next several days. The Weather Service was calling it a historic winter event, with potential record-breaking snowfall totals for the region. And Patricia was telling me I couldn't clear my own property. That's when an idea formed. If they wanted me to stop my excessive snow removal, then I would stop. Completely. But I would also stop clearing the HOA's shared property that I had been maintaining as a courtesy. See, when I first moved in, I noticed that the sidewalk connecting our cul-de-sac to the main road was technically HOA property, but no one ever cleared it. I started doing it myself just to be neighborly, along with clearing the snow from around the drainage grates near Patricia's property. The HOA had never asked me to do it, never thanked me, and according to Roger, had actually reduced their snow removal contractor services 2 years ago to save money, assuming residents would handle more of the work themselves. The next morning, another storm hit. I watched from my window as the snow piled up in my driveway. It was physically painful not to go out there and clear it, but I was making a point. My car was parked in the garage so I could still get to work. The snow could wait. By afternoon, it was clear that this storm was worse than predicted. The snow kept falling, heavy and wet, the kind that builds up fast and weighs a ton. I saw several of my neighbors struggling to clear their driveways, the snow already a foot deep and still coming down. Roger called me around 3. "Nathan, what's going on? Your driveway is completely snowed in." "Following HOA orders," I said cheerfully. "No excessive snow removal," he laughed. "You're going full malicious compliance. I love it. If they want to fine me for being a good neighbor, then I'll stop being a good neighbor." "Have you looked at Patricia's gutters lately?" I walked to my front window and peered out toward her house. Even through the falling snow, I could see that the gutters were sagging dramatically under the weight of accumulated ice. The storm drains near her property, which I usually kept clear, were completely buried under snow and ice. "That's going to be a problem for her," Roger noted. "Those gutters were already old. Add this much heavy snow and ice and they're going to come right off." "Not my problem anymore," I said. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. By the time it finally stopped, we had received 22 inches of new snow. The entire neighborhood looked like a winter wonderland, beautiful and completely impassable. I finally cleared just enough of my driveway to get my car out for work, doing the absolute minimum. My sidewalk remained buried. The HOA shared sidewalk was invisible under the snow. And most notably, the storm drains near Patricia's house were completely blocked, causing water from melting snow to pool and refreeze, creating a skating rink of black ice in the street. On the third day after the storm, I was working from home when I heard a tremendous crash from outside. I ran to the window and saw that the entire gutter system on the front of Patricia's house had collapsed, torn clean off by the weight of the ice and snow. It had taken part of her fascia board with it, and the gutter was now lying in twisted pieces across her front yard. I watched as Patricia came running out of her house, still in her bathrobe, staring at the damage in horror. Karen appeared moments later, having apparently been inside with her. They stood there in the cold, gesturing wildly at the destruction. My phone rang. It was Roger, and he was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Did you see it?" "Front row seat," I confirmed. "That's at least $8,000 in damage, probably more. And look, the drains are still blocked. When that ice melts, it's going to flood right into her basement." I felt a twinge of guilt, but it quickly passed. I had been maintaining those drains and clearing ice from her property for 3 years without acknowledgement. She had fined me for the privilege. This was the natural consequence of her own actions. Within an hour, Patricia was at my door again, this time looking significantly less composed. Her hair was disheveled, and she had thrown on a coat over her bathrobe. "Nathan, I need you to clear the drains near my property immediately," she demanded. "I'm sorry, Patricia, but I can't do that," I said calmly. "Per your directive, I'm not to engage in excessive snow removal activities. Clearing those drains would definitely fall under that category." Her face went red. "This is an emergency situation." "Then you should call the HOA's snow removal contractor. They're backed up with emergency calls. They can't get here for at least a week." I shrugged. "Then I guess you'll have to wait, or you could clear it yourself. Though I'd hate for you to engage in excessive snow removal." "You're being deliberately obstinate," she snapped. "I'm being compliant with your rules," I corrected. "You fined me for clearing snow, so I stopped. I didn't mean that you should stop all snow removal." "That's not what your written directive said. You specifically stated that my snow removal activities were excessive and violated HOA bylaws. I'm simply ensuring that I don't violate any more bylaws." Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish. "You're going to regret this, Nathan Jenkins." She stormed off, and I closed the door, feeling a grim satisfaction. I didn't enjoy her distress, but I was tired of being bullied by someone who had no actual authority beyond what the HOA documents gave her. The situation escalated quickly from there. Over the next few days, more problems emerged as the temperatures fluctuated. The blocked drainage system caused water to pool and refreeze repeatedly, creating hazardous conditions throughout our cul-de-sac. 2 of my neighbors slipped and fell, though thankfully neither was seriously injured. The mail carrier refused to deliver mail to several houses because the sidewalks were too dangerous. Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting, which I attended along with about 30 other residents. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building at the entrance to our development that was mainly used for HOA gatherings and the occasional neighborhood party. Patricia stood at the front of the room, looking haggard. The damage to her house was clearly weighing on her, both financially and emotionally. Karen sat beside her, looking equally unhappy. We're here to discuss the recent winter storm damage and the negligence that has put our community at risk, Patricia began. Negligence. Roger spoke up from the back. You mean the negligence of the HOA board in maintaining proper drainage and snow removal services? Several residents murmured in agreement. Patricia's expression hardened. I'm referring to the negligence of Nathan Jenkins, who has refused to maintain basic snow removal despite being capable of doing so. All eyes turned to me. I stood up calmly. I was fined by this board for excessive snow removal. I have the documentation right here. I held up the printed email. I was told that my snow removal activities violated HOA bylaws and that further violations would result in additional fines and legal action. So I stopped. I'm simply following your directive. That's taken completely out of context, Karen interjected. Really? I looked at the paper. Because it seems pretty clear. You cited Section 12.4, which, by the way, has nothing to do with snow removal. It's about exterior paint colors. You fabricated a violation and fined me for being a responsible homeowner. So I stopped being a responsible homeowner where the HOA is concerned. The room erupted in conversation. Several residents started pulling up the bylaws on their phones. I saw Susan Miller, the third board member, sink lower in her seat. This is absurd. Patricia tried to regain control. The point is that Nathan has been maintaining certain common areas, and his sudden cessation of that maintenance has created dangerous conditions. Common areas that the HOA is responsible for maintaining, Roger pointed out. Nathan was doing that work voluntarily, out of his own pocket and on his own time. Work that the HOA should have been doing, and you fined him for it. Another resident, Tom Fletcher, stood up. I want to see the receipts for our HOA snow removal contractor. We pay dues specifically for maintenance like this. Patricia's face went pale. That information is in our financial records, which we have a right to review, Tom pressed. I'm making a formal request right now. The meeting devolved into chaos. Multiple residents started demanding financial transparency, questioning the validity of various fines Patricia had issued over the years, and asking why common area maintenance had been so poor despite regular dues payments. I slipped out quietly, feeling like I had lit a fuse I couldn't unlight. When I got home, I found a note tucked into my door. It was from Susan Miller. Nathan, please call me. We need to talk about what happened at the meeting. I called her number and she answered on the first ring. Thank you for calling back, she said, sounding tired. I need to apologize to you. I've been on the HOA board for 2 years, and I've let Patricia get away with too much. The fine she issued you was completely fabricated. There's no bylaw against snow removal. She was angry because several residents had commented that your property always looked so well maintained, and she took it as a personal criticism of her own property. So this was all personal, entirely, and the snow removal contractor situation is worse than you know. Patricia reduced their services to once-a-week emergencies only and pocketed the difference in the budget. She's been doing things like this for years. Small amounts that don't trigger alarm, but they add up. That's embezzlement. I know. Tom Fletcher is a lawyer, and after tonight's meeting, he's already talking about calling for a full audit and potential legal action. I wanted you to know that I'm supporting the effort to remove Patricia from the board and reverse any fines she's issued. I appreciate that, Susan. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I should have. We hung up, and I sat in my living room processing everything. What had started as a petty dispute about snow removal had uncovered something much larger. I felt vindicated but also concerned about where this was all heading. The next morning, I woke to another crash from outside. Patricia's side gutters had also collapsed, taking more of her fascia and soffit with them. The damage to her house was now extensive, easily $15,000 or more. I saw her standing in her yard crying while Karen tried to comfort her. Despite everything, I felt bad for her. I grabbed my shovel and went outside. Roger saw me and came over. "What are you doing?" "The right thing," I said. "I made my point. I'm not letting people get hurt because of a feud." I spent the next 2 hours clearing the drainage areas and breaking up the ice around the storm drains. Several other neighbors came out to help, including Tom Fletcher. We worked together to make the street safe again. Patricia watched from her window but didn't come out or say anything. That afternoon, I received a formal letter from the HOA. I expected it to be another fine or threat, but instead, it was a notice that an emergency election had been called for the following week. Patricia, Karen, and the rest of the board were being recalled, and new elections would be held. The letter was signed by Tom Fletcher and 15 other residents who had formed an oversight committee. The week leading up to the election was tense. Patricia had her supporters, mostly older residents who valued her strictness and attention to property values. But the majority of the neighborhood had grown tired of her authoritarian approach, and the revelation about the mishandled contractor funds had turned many of her allies against her. I was approached by several residents asking if I would consider running for a board position. I declined. I had no interest in HOA politics. I just wanted to live in peace. The election was held on a Saturday morning. The turnout was unprecedented, nearly 90% of the neighborhood. When the votes were counted, Patricia and Karen had both been removed. Susan retained her position, along with 2 new board members, Tom Fletcher and Roger. Patricia's house stood as a monument to the consequences of petty tyranny. The collapsed gutters remained unrepaired, and contractors I spoke to said she was having trouble getting anyone to take the job because she kept trying to dictate exactly how they should do it and refusing to pay fair rates. 2 weeks after the election, the new HOA board held its first official meeting. One of their first actions was to formally rescind my fine and issue a written apology. They also contracted with a proper snow removal service and established clear, reasonable guidelines for property maintenance that didn't involve fabricated violations or petty power plays. Tom Fletcher called me a few days later with an update. We completed the financial audit. Patricia had been misappropriating funds for 3 years. Not huge amounts, but consistent. She was paying herself an unauthorized administrative fee and reducing contractor services to cover it. "Are you pressing charges?" "We're giving her the option to pay it back. It's about $12,000 total. If she refuses, then yes, we'll involve the police." "What about the gutter damage?" "That's on her. Her homeowner's insurance is fighting the claim because they say she was negligent in maintaining the drainage. They might be right. You were handling that maintenance, and when you stopped, it should have fallen to her or the HOA. Since she was the HOA president, she had a responsibility to ensure it was done. She failed." I felt a complex mix of emotions. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone's life. I had just wanted to shovel my driveway without being harassed. Spring came eventually, as it always does in Minnesota. The snow melted, revealing all the winter damage throughout the neighborhood. Patricia's house looked worse in the daylight, with visible water damage to her siding and foundation from the drainage issues. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was planning to sell and move. I also heard that she had quietly paid back the misappropriated funds to avoid criminal charges. One evening in late March, I was out planting some early-season flowers when Patricia approached me. She looked older than she had at the start of winter, worn down by the stress of everything that had happened. "Nathan," she said quietly, "may I speak with you?" "Of course." She took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, a real one, not the official one from the board. What I did was wrong. The fine was baseless and my motivations were petty. I let my pride and my need for control hurt people, including myself." I set down my trowel and stood up. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm selling the house. Moving to a condo in Florida where I won't have to worry about snow or HOAs or any of it." She gave a weak laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? I terrorized people over HOA rules, and now I'm running away from exactly that kind of environment. I hope you find what you're looking for in Florida." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I hope you know I'm not a monster. I just got caught up in the power of the position. It became my whole identity, and when I felt that identity threatened, I lashed out. That's not an excuse, just an explanation. We all make mistakes, Patricia. The important thing is learning from them." We stood there in the fading evening light, two people who had been at war over something as ridiculous as snow removal, now just neighbors having a human moment. She left a month later. I watched the moving truck pull away and felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a kind of sadness for everyone involved. The new HOA board was remarkably functional. Tom, Roger, and Susan ran things with common sense and transparency. They published monthly financial reports, held regular open meetings, and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. That next winter, when the first snow fell, I went out and cleared my driveway without a second thought. I also cleared the shared walkways and kept the drains clear, just as I had before. But this time, the HOA board formally recognized the work and even offered to reimburse me for my time and materials. I declined the money but appreciated the acknowledgement. Roger and I became good friends. We often grabbed coffee and talked about the crazy winter that had changed everything. He loved to tell the story of Patricia's gutters collapsing, though he always added that he felt bad for how things ended for her. I learned something important through the whole experience. Standing up to unreasonable authority matters, but so does knowing when to show grace. I could have let Patricia's house flood, could have watched her suffer and felt justified. Instead, I chose to be a good neighbor despite her actions, and that decision made all the difference in how things resolved. Karen moved away too, following Patricia's resignation. Apparently, their friendship had been built entirely on their shared role in the HOA, and without that bond, they had nothing in common. Susan told me that Karen had sent a brief email apologizing for her role in the harassment, but offering no real explanation for her behavior. The incident became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Heights. New residents would hear the story and laugh, sometimes in disbelief that an HOA president would fine someone for clearing snow. But those of us who lived through it knew it was all too real. I still live in the same house. My driveway is still the most well-maintained on the block in winter. But now when neighbors comment on it, it's with appreciation rather than resentment. Several have even asked me for tips on efficient snow removal, and I'm happy to share what I have learned. The house that Patricia lived in was bought by a young family from Iowa. They were friendly and enthusiastic about their first home purchase. When I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood, they mentioned that they had heard there was an interesting history with the previous owner. Something about gutters and an HOA dispute, the husband Mark asked. I laughed. That's one way to put it. Let's just say our HOA went through some changes and it all worked out for the better. Good to know, his wife Jennifer said. We were worried about HOA drama. We almost didn't buy in a neighborhood with one. Under the current board, you will not have any problems, I assured them. They're reasonable people who care about the community. Did you help fix whatever the problem was? I thought about how to answer that. In a way. Sometimes you have to stop cooperating with unreasonable demands before people realize they were being unreasonable. Mark nodded thoughtfully. Malicious compliance. Something like that. They turned out to be excellent neighbors. Mark was handy and helped several residents with minor repairs. Jennifer organized a neighborhood book club that became surprisingly popular. Their 2 kids brought new energy to our quiet cul-de-sac. One Saturday morning, about a year after Patricia left, I was having coffee with Roger when he brought up an interesting point. You know what's funny? He said. Patricia's entire crusade was about maintaining property values and neighborhood standards. But by trying to control everything so tightly, she was actually driving people away. Since the new board took over and relaxed the ridiculous rules, we have had nothing but positive growth. Home values are up, people actually want to live here, and the neighborhood feels like a community rather than a prison. He was right. Under Patricia's regime, several houses had sat on the market for months, unable to sell because potential buyers were turned off by the HOA reputation. Now, homes sold within weeks, often with multiple offers. The HOA newsletter, which under Patricia had been a monthly list of violations and reminders about rules, became an actual community publication. It featured resident spotlights, upcoming events, and useful information about local services and resources. Susan spearheaded the transformation, bringing in a neighbor who was a graphic designer to make it actually look professional and appealing. In the fall, the HOA organized its first annual community festival. It was held in the clubhouse and the surrounding common areas with food trucks, games for kids, and live music from a local band. Over 200 people attended, including residents from neighboring developments who had heard about our neighborhood turnaround. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, when Tom Fletcher came over with a beer in hand. Hell of a difference from last year, he said, surveying the crowd. No kidding. You ever regret how things went down? With Patricia, I thought about it. Sometimes I wonder if there was a better way to handle it, but honestly, she needed to face consequences for her actions. If I had just paid the fine and kept my head down, she would have kept abusing her position. Sometimes conflict is necessary for growth. Tom clenched his beer against my soda can. Wise words, and for what it is worth, you inspired a lot of people. After word got around about what you did, several other residents came forward with their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Your stand gave them courage to speak up. That was gratifying to hear. I had not thought of my actions as particularly brave, just necessary. But I suppose that is often how these things work. Someone has to be the first to say no, to push back, to refuse to accept unreasonable treatment. Winter came again, and with it, more snow. But this time, there was no drama, no fines, no collapsed gutters. Just neighbors helping neighbors, keeping our streets safe and our properties maintained. The HOA contracted snow removal service supplemented our individual efforts, creating a system that actually worked. I found myself thinking about Patricia sometimes, wondering how she was adjusting to life in Florida. I hoped she had found peace and maybe learned something from the experience. People are capable of change, even if it takes hitting rock bottom to motivate that change. Roger told me he had run into Karen at a Home Depot in Minneapolis. She was visiting family and seemed embarrassed to see him. They had a brief, awkward conversation where she mentioned she was working at a library in Arizona and enjoying a quieter life. She asked about the neighborhood, and Roger told her things were good. She did not ask about Patricia, and Roger did not volunteer any information. It was strange to think about how much had changed in just 2 years. A petty fine over snow removal had exposed corruption, transformed an HOA, and fundamentally altered the character of our neighborhood. And it had all started because I refused to accept unreasonable authority. The new HOA board established a formal policy review process, ensuring that any new rules or enforcement actions had to be approved by majority vote at an open meeting. It was a simple change that made a huge difference. Patricia had operated in a gray area, using vaguely worded bylaws to justify whatever she wanted to do. The new system required transparency and accountability. They also created a dispute resolution process that allowed residents to challenge fines or violations without having to hire a lawyer or face immediate escalation. It was common sense governance, the kind that should have been in place all along. One evening, I was shoveling my driveway after a light snow when the new family, Mark and Jennifer, came over with their kids. "We wanted to thank you," Jennifer said. "We've heard bits and pieces of the story about the previous HOA president, and we realized you're the reason things are so different now." Their daughter, Emma, who was about 8, handed me a card. It was homemade, with crayon drawings of houses and snowflakes. Inside it said, "Thank you for making our neighborhood nice." I felt a lump in my throat. "You are very welcome, Emma. I am glad you are happy here." "We love it," Mark added. "This is everything we hoped for in a community. Friendly people, reasonable rules, and neighbors who look out for each other." After they left, I stood in my driveway, holding that handmade card, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I had won some battle against Patricia, but because the outcome had created something genuinely good. A community where people wanted to live, where conflicts were handled reasonably, and where doing the right thing was appreciated rather than punished. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. The HOA board announced plans to renovate the clubhouse and add some updated amenities like a small fitness room and a better kitchen. They held several community meetings to gather input, and the final design incorporated suggestions from dozens of residents. The project was funded by a modest increase in HOA dues, which everyone agreed to because of the transparency in how the money would be used. Tom Fletcher joked that under Patricia, suggesting a dues increase for actual community benefit would have been impossible because no one trusted the money would be used appropriately. I continued my quiet life, working, maintaining my home, and being an active part of the community. I joined the book club Jennifer started and discovered I actually enjoyed discussing literature with my neighbors. I helped coach a youth baseball team that practiced in our community park. I attended HOA meetings not out of obligation or fear, but because I actually cared about the decisions being made. Roger was re-elected to the board for another term, running unopposed because everyone recognized he was doing an excellent job. Susan continued her steady, competent service. Tom Fletcher stepped down after 2 years, saying he had accomplished what he set out to do and wanted to focus more on his law practice and family. A new resident, Marcus Thompson, replaced Tom on the board. Marcus was a software engineer who brought fresh ideas about using technology to improve community communication. Under his guidance, the HOA launched a website and a mobile app that made it easy for residents to access information, report maintenance issues, and stay connected with neighborhood events. It was remarkable how much positive change came from standing up to one unreasonable person. I do not think of myself as a hero or a revolutionary. I was just a guy who wanted to shovel his driveway without being hassled. But sometimes that is all it takes, one person refusing to accept unjust treatment to catalyze broader change. The third winter after the incident, we got another major storm. This time, the whole neighborhood pulled together. Those with snowblowers helped clear driveways for elderly residents. Teenagers earned extra money by shoveling walkways. The HOA's contractor handled the main roads and common areas efficiently. And I cleared my driveway multiple times without anyone saying a word, except to compliment me on my diligence. I thought about Patricia and her collapsed gutters, about how her need for control had literally brought her house down around her. It was a perfect metaphor, really. When you build your authority on artificial constraints and petty enforcement, it cannot sustain any real weight. Eventually, it all comes crashing down. But I also thought about her apology, about the human moment we shared before she left. She was not a monster, just someone who had lost perspective and paid a heavy price for it. I hoped she had found that perspective in Florida, that she was happier and wiser for the experience. In the end, the story of my HOA battle is not really about snow removal or gutters or even Patricia Donaldson. It is about community, about standing up for what is right, and about the importance of reasonable governance. It is about how small acts of resistance against petty tyranny can create space for something better to emerge. My driveway is still the cleanest on the block every winter. But now it is a source of neighborhood pride rather than HOA violations. I keep the storm drains clear not because I have to, but because it is the right thing to do. And when spring comes and melts away all the snow and ice, it reveals a community that is stronger, healthier, and more connected than it was before. That is worth all the drama, all the conflict, and yes, even Patricia's collapsed gutters. Sometimes you have to let things fall apart before you can build them back better. Sometimes malicious compliance is exactly the medicine an ailing community needs. And sometimes, refusing to shovel your driveway is the most important thing you can do for your neighborhood. I still live in Meadowbrook Heights, still shovel my snow, still participate in community events. But now I do it in a place that values contribution over control, community over conformity, and common sense over arbitrary rules. And that makes all the difference.